Okay, real quickly, we're in the welcome and announcements, obviously, and I'll get to new members and visitors in a minute here. We have a short program that's 7 o'clock till 7:40, a little break, and then we'll do our long program with Kaitlyn Pauley. You'll hear more about her in a second or a few minutes. Okay, do we have any first-time visitors, new members? If so, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Eric's got a mic right behind you.
Oh, hello. Hi. My ancestors came from Poland, Lithuania, Germany, Ireland, Scotland, let's see, Switzerland, Austria, and a few other places I probably forgot.
No list, very impressive.
But originally from New York City. Family could be traced, one line can be traced back to the 1790s. Like I had other came over as immigrants right before World War I. So a lot of diversity there too. We moved here 4 years ago from Baltimore, where we lived for many years, 25 years, and for myself.
Go Terps.
Yep. And we lived in, here 4 years there, 25, Connecticut also for about 20 years. So I've been around a little bit, but the main thing is that I find this fascinating subject because you never know what you're going to find out. And I'm hoping that somewhere is buried treasure.
Can I get your name, please?
Oh, Dan Greifenberger, yes.
Okay.
So because you never know, you never know, some land might have been left 10 generations ago and they forgot to sign the paperwork, that kind of thing.
It happens. Is there anything that you particularly are adept in, a certain technique, a certain interest group, for instance?
Well, the main thing I would like to, for me, interest-wise, is as you well know, Eastern Europe is very different than Western Europe with records and the wars and all that. So I'm trying to get beyond my great-grandparents on one side of the family because I don't know absolutely anything beyond that, and that's not that long ago. So I'm very interested in seeing what we can do about Eastern Europe and how far we can go back. And that would be my interest.
Okay.
Yep. Here, Betty.
Great. Thank you.
Hi, Betty Redifer. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, came up back 4 years ago. I played around with genealogy for quite a while. I did find some German relatives, and in Germany, which I went and visit. That was probably about 25 years ago, and I kept in touch with them a little bit. Just trying to find out more from time to time where I find the time.
Betty's Thompson from I know it's embarrassing, but it's like royalty in Maryland, so I know it doesn't mean anything up here, but
I'm also Scottish Irish too, so.
Well, welcome. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening, and I look forward to seeing you at future meetings. We've got some things working behind the scenes. We're still developing for a little bit more collaboration where people can kind of share in more than just a lecture type format where people can collaborate. And I think that's something that's really pretty exciting to me. I think that's something we can all do for each other. So again, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, real quickly, I'm just going to blast through this. Upcoming programs. Our board meeting is next Tuesday night. It's on Zoom. All these you can sign up on our website. Writers group is on Zoom Thursday, October 2nd. The writers group just published, well, they published a little while ago their book. I encourage you to look up that link on the website. I think it's $9.99, available on Amazon. So it's pretty exciting. I wish I were part of it, but I get to at least talk about it, so that's good. Scanning event, June. I didn't change that one, I guess. Eric, October 5th. 4th, could be. I guess I missed a slide. Okay, we got a lot going on. Okay, sorry about that. So scanning event, again, you can sign up. You can contact Eric. Eric's coordinating the scanning group. We're working in the town of Rush right now. And we will be reaching out to other historical societies, genealogy societies, Rundell Library, to try to figure out who's got what collections that need digitization. So we're trying to prepare for our next gen of scanning projects. Saturday, October 4th, Family Finders. We're going to focus on Italian genealogy, of which I know very little, but my partner in that endeavor is Italian and is pretty strong in that area. So at any rate, it's kind of a beginner focus from 10:30 to 12 at the Rundell Library downtown, right by Dinosaur. You can grab lunch when you're done. And Tuesday, October 14th, Technology Interest Group. We're going to have Thomas McKenty. If you haven't heard Thomas speak, you're in for a treat. Sign up for this. He's a really high energy guy, really relatable. He's been pretty helpful to RGS. He's loaned us some of his little short presentations, or he's allowed us to use them on the website. Wonderful speaker. He's going on I'll call it a sabbatical for lack of a better term, somewhere near the end of the year. So this will be one of the last opportunities to hear him speak in this kind of forum for the foreseeable future. Okay, that's going to be our long program in a minute. You can peruse this real quickly. Just a couple other things I've got real quickly. We did a member survey over the summer. Bill Moore put that together. One of the things that I think I found most interesting is how infrequently folks reference our website. Over half the respondents said that they use the website primarily to sign up for events. So that suggests to me and others that we need to make that website much more vibrant, much more of a go-to place. It's a kind of a gateway into other parts of your research journey. I talked to Kaitlyn about the Western New York site. It's got Syracuse, the Central New York site. Both those sites are quite strong. There's a lot there. I think we've got a lot of room for improvement there. So we could really use some help in trying to redesign or figure out what should be on our site without bogging it down. We want it to be important and valuable to each of you. So I'm not sure we're quite there, but there's room for improvement. And I'd say the last thing is our special interest groups. We're also looking at trying to redefine or refocus those. Right now we have the writers group. Lori's out here somewhere, I think. Lori heads the writers group. No experience necessary. Show up, tell your story, collaborate. They seem to have a great time in their meetings, I got to say. And then they had a book. I don't know about you. I haven't really been published other than a couple of magazine articles. And it's like, well, it's kind of cool. We also have a technology interest group. Bill Moore coordinates that. I think they're still kind of working on through some of the focal points for that group. And then at this point, we still have a DNA special interest group. I think that's ripe for some redevelopment so we can focus on DNA. But what we're also hearing is that folks that come to the DNA group really are looking for a lot of good basic genealogical research skills. So I think there's some room there to redevelop, reinvigorate these. So just stay tuned. There'll be more coming. I want to talk some of this over with the board next week, and then we'll get it out to you through emails, through meetings, announcements, and so forth. That's all I've got. Tanya, you're up.
Thank you, John. I'm Tanya Post. I'm the first vice president for the Rochester Genealogical Society, and I'm thrilled to see so many of you in person here tonight for our September meeting. I'm very happy to introduce our short program speakers as I put on my reading glasses so I can read their bios here. We're proud to present tonight for our short presentation Janice, and I should have asked you, Janice, how to pronounce your last name. Grattan, Janice Grattan, docent, and Patty Garrett, the curator of the Big Springs Museum. Big Springs is located at 3095 Main Street in Caledonia, and it is well worth the trip to go out there. Their mission is to interpret the continuing story of the Caledonia Mumford community by connecting history to contemporary life. The current exhibits that they have out there are showcasing the history of fiber arts, how volunteering shapes communities, and also the shared heritage with the Black families who settled in the Calmum area. Janice and Patty, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you.
Everyone, I'm so glad that we've been invited to share our wonderful museum with you guys. Our museum the Historical Society was started in 1936. We acquired our 10,000 square foot building in the early 40s, and we've been open at least once a week since then, even during COVID. Because only I was there. So we operate with a 13-member board. All our collection is been donated locally, Caledonia, Mumford, Clifton, Belcota, Kylerville, any place that, because we were there first. So now York has a historical society, and we've been sending some things to them because they have a place for all their stuff now. But anyway. So we have a large group of volunteers, probably, I don't know, 40 maybe dedicated volunteers. We do, they help with preservation, archiving, research, filing, and they also help putting up exhibits and taking them down and doing the research, for those exhibits. So if you want to come and volunteer, we'll find a job for you, not to worry. Okay, so Caledonia was settled by the Scottish people, and we keep a large genealogy file, over probably 500 families. And we brought some examples for you to see like what kind of things a small museum might have. And one thing you need to know is in handling any of that old papers and things, please wash your hands first so that there's no grime or oil, left on the material. So I know we're here for our Black History exhibit. In 1999, a couple of us went down to the Second Baptist Church in Mumford. That's the first African-American church in Monroe County. And we asked if they would share their history with us because they came during the Great Migration and all came from Culpeper, Virginia, or the surrounding area. And they still go back and forth every summer and have reunions back and forth. So we went there and just started asking some questions. Share your history.
So what we've done is in our interviews with the different families, we have put together, this is just one panel from our exhibit, but just them telling their stories, their family photos, and then how they're actually related to each other. A lot of these folks are related to each other. And then as we moved on, this display is on our third story, which we are not handicap accessible. So within the past 2 years, we received a grant. And what we did was we interviewed the family members that are still alive and wanting to share the story of their families. We put it on a kiosk on our first floor so everybody could enjoy the stories. We brought the kiosk with us. So we're going to invite you during the break to come in and listen to the second generation talk about their families, talk about what it was like when they were growing up in Caledonia. And it's a phenomenal thing. And we can always add more stories. This is not just about that story. So we're going to invite you to check that out during our break.
So our African-American families came. Mr. Harmon was stationed in the Civil War in Culpeper. And I believe the chef there was a Black man. So after the war, Mr. Harmon comes home and he realizes that there's a lot of opportunity for work. So he contacted that man in Culpeper, and then sent his son and his brother to Culpeper with horse and wagon and brought back 7 men. And they said, oh, we think we can make a go here. So we ended up with, I believe, 28 families. 22 of those families are still represented in our area. So it's really a unique thing that they're so integrated. You know, you don't hear a lot about people being discriminated against. Until then, they said when they went in the service or they got a job. But as far as, you know, in our 6,000 people,
Mhm,
I think
that's about
5 or 6,000 people, they're a big part of that community. And so we're wondering, you know, do you have any questions we could help you with? I mean, come on. Give me one question. Yes. Oops. We're open Sundays 1 to 4 and Mondays 9 to noon, or and by appointment. So we do tours and things like that.
So the one thing I wanted to mention too, in regards to research, so many people will go to the public library or go to the internet. Your local historical societies have a wealth of information for you, especially if families have donated their family histories. For example, all of the literature or the photos that you see back on our back table, that's from one family. And 50 years from now, when we're long gone, their family can come in and do the research. It's going to be there. So what we've been doing is encouraging all the families of the Caledonia area, come in, make a family file, give us your old photos, give us your genealogy so that your grandkids can come in and research this as well. And handle it. Yeah, touch it, see it. You came in a couple of weeks ago and you found a family photo that you didn't know. So you know, it's not just about the library and the internet. Your historical society has a lot of information for you. And being a small town, it's amazing how much information we have. I didn't grow up in Caledonia, but I have family ties there. And I found a picture of my mother's graduation picture that I didn't know of. So, you know, if ever you're interested in just coming in to see how we keep our files, you know, we'd be happy to have you. We'd love for you to come in and see us.
Yes.
Yeah, could you clarify what year the first Black families came after the Civil War? Because you mentioned the Great Migration.
Right, they came
That's-
during
that's-
the Great Migration. So I believe from like 1880 on. It was a while after the war before they started coming to
Okay.
Caledonia. I don't know if it was quite that long, but
But you've got a list of names, right?
oh, yes, we of the 28 families that came and files on all those families. Anything that they were willing to share with us.
Thank you.
Oh, oh. The big screen. Can you read them? Oh, all the way over to the right.
Here,
What are the names of some of the original families that settled Caledonia prior to the Civil War?
Well, we would have the Scottish families, the McCalls, the McNaughtons, the McPhersons, McCormicks, all that mix.
And the area that they settled was actually referred to as Inverness. So that was on the outskirts of Caledonia, and I actually live in Inverness. So there's a monument there dedicated to the first settlers, and that's on the corner of Route 20 and Quarry Road.
Right, one of our members said, mention the school files there, as I found a lot of photos of kids in front of their school back in the late 18 or early 1900s, family files too.
We do keep a pretty extensive school file, like back from when there was still one-room schools, even before there were yearbooks. So a lot of times we have photos and graduation certificates and when the whole senior class from Livingston County went to DC. We have big, long photos like that with the names on. So we have quite a bit of that kind of thing.
Digitizing any of your collections?
Can you repeat the question too?
Yes, she wanted to know if we were digitizing any of our collections. We're working on that. We've started even starting an inventory and accessioning our huge collection. So we're not there yet, but we're working on it.
Takes a village.
Oops.
When I was there last weekend, one of the exhibits that I was very impressed with was the one on volunteering in the community. Would you speak a bit about how that exhibit came to be and what your experiences have been with volunteering in the Calmon area?
So the Shaping a Community exhibit, that was the brainchild of Jean Guthrie, I believe. And she wanted to showcase how people shape your community. So when I became president, that project had been kind of sitting on the back burner for a long time, and we brought it to life. And we had different people from our community, all the way from current to people who served in the military. What's the oldest uniform we have, Patty? Civil War? Yeah, we have Civil War. But it just shows how each individual in the community has such an impact and how we can help serve our community. We may not get put up in a museum, but every person who volunteers makes a difference. And for myself, I volunteer a lot of hours at the museum. I do get paid for my docent work, but I volunteer a lot and it's very rewarding. But the people that we have featured were key people who were involved in, for instance, the fire department, the police department, the military, and it's a beautiful exhibit.
Got a couple more things from Zoom. One of our members, Miranda Howard, wrote, my ancestors are from Inverness and are buried in the Inverness Cemetery. I wrote a chapter in the Writers Group book on the family. You can look it up in Many Paths Discovering Family History. Little shameless plug for our book. Jody Marr said that she's in one of the long Washington, D.C. photos. Kathy Angel asks if any of the files are available online or are they only in person at the museum?
Some of them are available online, and like Patty said, we're still scanning a lot. But if someone is interested in something, we will pull it for them. We'd be happy to scan it, send it to them, have it available for them.
Okay, and what is the time frame of the earliest records you have in your archives?
That's your question.
Yeah, I'm going to say just prior to the Civil War, where we actually have a lot of things, 1812, 1830, not much, or if anything. By 1850, we start, having some artifacts and written material. Another place I'm just thinking now to go to look for things. Caledonia had its own newspaper for decades. And so to go through them, we were just looking one day and we found that a man that lives around the corner from the museum actually was one of the electricians that lit the Statue of Liberty, right from Caledonia. So it's interesting to see how far and wide people actually travel.
We also had a local newspaper called the Caledonia Advertiser, and I think that was established in like 1910 era. We have all of them from the 1900s and 1917, right up until current times when they finally closed their doors. But very interesting. You could just sit there and read for hours. Aunt Betty went to visit somebody in Virginia, but there are little nuggets in there. There's birth announcements, there's marriage announcements. So just another place to look. You just never know where to dig.
When I was looking at the advertiser, I saw that the first issue of January every year had the births, marriages, and deaths for the prior year.
Yes. Anybody else?
I'm interested in a early judge, Judge William Smith from Caledonia.
Willard.
Yeah, and one of his descendants is Zadie Dunning Remine, and she is buried in Mumford there. We're trying to find Zadie's father, Mr. Dunning, who apparently went west and died out there, but I don't have any date for him.
Well, Patty's taking notes as you're writing. So we'll be happy to look into that for you.
I don't recognize either of those names. Judge Smith was the first judge west of the Genesee River. And he just did a big exhibit on a man from Scottsville that did about everything. And he was one of the students of Willard Smith. We have a beautiful portrait that we've had conserved.
Recently.
Yeah. Mhm. Okay. All right. So please invite him to come back.
We'd all love for you to take a ride out to Caledonia. I'm there every Sunday from noon until 4. I would love company, so please stop in. We'd love to share our files and show you how we have organized everything for easy research for folks who are passionate about genealogy.
Come back and join us.
Yes, and please come back. Check out our goodies on the table. Thank you.
Okay, if everybody would take their seat, we're going to get started with our long presentation tonight. And while you're taking your seats, I have one announcement. We are going to have a book giveaway after Kaitlyn's presentation. We had a book donation by Andrew Paris. It's the book, The Demon of Unrest by Eric Larson, and it's a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War. So we're doing a random drawing of a name from the people who are in person tonight. And Mary Ellen says it's a very good book. She's read it as well. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to introduce our long program speaker tonight. And again, pausing while I put on my reading glasses. Okay. So our second presentation tonight is from Kaitlyn Pauley, who's going to be speaking to us on the topic On the Frontier, Early Migration into Western New York. She's a professional genealogist and former educator from Western New York, and she's now based in Western Virginia. She graduated from the BYU Idaho's Family History Research Program and also ProGen 66. She serves on the board of the Western New York Genealogical Society and the Virginia Genealogical Society, and she's a volunteer with the Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy and the Grip Genealogy Institute. She's the owner of Pauley Genealogy, and she specializes in genealogical research in New York, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. So Kaitlyn, I'm now going to turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you. Well, I got to catch up with quite a few of you during the break, and you are definitely a crowd that is interested in what I have to say, and I'm a little afraid that some of you may know some more than I do. So welcome everyone to On the Frontier, Early Migration into Western New York. A lot of people came across ancestors that lived, however briefly, in Western New York. We know that it was and still is really a place of constant migration in and out. From the very beginnings of New Amsterdam, now known as Buffalo, The area around it has been one of constant change, with people frequently migrating in and out of the area. Today, we're really going to focus on the critical building up time of the 1790s till about the Civil War. So our session agenda for today, we're going to start out talking about the early inhabitants of the area and the treaties that they participated in. Then we'll go into New York and its boundaries, push factors for migration, pull factors for migration. Then we'll spend quite a bit of time on migration trends. I hope that everybody wants to see a lot of maps, because there's going to be a lot of maps in my presentation. It's just one of those things that helps make the concepts click. And then, of course, we will finish up this mainly historical presentation with ways that you can use this information in your genealogy research. So the early inhabitants, we know that the first people to call Western New York home were indigenous people. The Haudenosaunee people, also known as the people of the Longhouse or the Iroquois Confederacy, were the native people inhabiting the area when the first white settlers began thinking about coming to this area. This is a map from 1655, and it shows a little of what is now known as New York, and how it was occupied by the Dutch. And the area that the Haudenosaunee people lived in was technically claimed by France. Even back then, there were Franciscans, some explorers like Champlain, who had set foot in our Western New York area as early as 615. We know there were some military installations like Fort Niagara that were built very early, but permanent inhabitation of the lands was not until much, much later. Before settlers arrived, this was Haudenosaunee land, and really the Seneca tribe. They are known as the keepers of the Western Door, and they were the predominant tribe in this area and still are to this day. The Revolutionary War changed everything. The treaties after 1783 forced the Seneca to cede vast areas of their land. And so just remember, these treaties weren't just lines on a paper. They were literally moving families who had lived for generations, and they got to see people come in, you know, cut down trees and make homes on the land that they had once called home. So all of this about the first settlers is layered on top of that existing Native American presence. So back in 1768, we have the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. You can see the line on the map here. That was basically a dividing line. The Native people ceded 1/2 of their land to what we now know as the United States, but back when it was under British control. The land the Native peoples retained is to the northwest, so the western part of New York, northwest part of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana. This is just a few years before the Revolutionary War, and the map makes it clear that there really was no settlement on the western side, because that was still, you know, able for the Native Americans to settle there with no white settlement. So I'm often amazed when I think of how this area that I grew up in and you guys live in really didn't get settled that early. I live in West Virginia now, and you can see that it's on the southeast side of that Fort Stanwix boundary line, and you have super early inhabitation, like early 1700s. And so there's just that vast difference depending on what side of that boundary line you are on as to how early you'll see white settlement in an area. So to form the borders of New York State, there were border wars with quite a few other states. And of course, the boundary of a state is pretty important. And through the 1600s and 1700s, the New York boundary was quite a mess. This map shows many of the different boundaries over time that were disputed. So Connecticut claimed parts of Lower New York until 1663 and smaller portions until 1731. New York and New Jersey had a border dispute, which was down in the Hudson River Valley, and that even lasted into the 1800s. New York claimed part of what is now Massachusetts, and they claimed all of what is now Vermont as theirs. New York eventually relinquished that claim to Vermont in 1790. And there were also quite a few issues with New York and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania decided they would claim a lot of the southern part of New York, which they eventually relinquished to New York. And then there was that tiny little corner of Northwest PA that is where Erie is now. That's called the Erie Triangle. And that was disputed by not only New York and Pennsylvania, but also Connecticut and Massachusetts. And eventually that land was given to Pennsylvania because it was really strategic for them. They really needed that water access to Lake Erie. So after all of those little border wars were resolved, we get the shape of New York that we recognize today. Not long after America claimed its independence, a very similar treaty to the Fort Stanwix Treaty was signed. The Massachusetts and New York states were at odds about the use of the land in Western New York. Massachusetts claimed it as their own. New York wanted it so that they could sell it. It was agreed at this meeting that Massachusetts would yield all claim to land in New York west of a line to be drawn from the 82nd milestone on the northern Pennsylvania state line, north along a transit meridian line along present-day Chemung and Steuben County to a point on Lake Ontario near Sodus Bay. Okay, so that became known as the preemption line, and you can see it as the blue line on the right side of your screen there. And so what that agreement line meant was that everything to the west of the preemption line was Massachusetts territory, and they had to sell it. But first they had to get the Haudenosaunee people's permission. So this is the beginning of the mess that was land in Western New York. Okay, it's quite the saga. Anything to the east of the preemption line, that was still New York's, and they were fine to sell that and do as they pleased. So when we're talking about Western New York today, we are talking about everything that's to the west of the preemption line here. Now, of course, just making this line and having it surveyed couldn't be a simple process. So there were issues with that preemption line. The first preemption line, which was in 1788, was placed too far west by their surveyor, and it ended up near Seneca Lake. And they said the line itself was supposed to run straight north from the Pennsylvania border to Lake Ontario, but surveyor Hugh Maxwell was off. Later, a corrected line was drawn further east, closer to Geneva. That was the main sticking point, is what side was going to get Geneva. This mistake left a disputed strip of land, and it was called the Gore. So as compensation, the state of New York, who realized, oh, we made a mistake and we've been selling land that we shouldn't have been selling, they ended up giving the new owners of this western part, who was called the Pulteney Associates, I think, oh, we're good. They decided that they would give the Pulteney Associates 3 or more acres to the east just to kind of make up for their mistake. So families who bought land in the Gore area before they realized that the preemption line was misdrawn in 1788, sometimes they had to go to court to defend those titles to the land. Sometimes it's almost as if they didn't even buy the land, so they had to go and purchase it again. So you might find some interesting land documents, or you might find 2 sets in different places, and it can just lead to confusion for us, as I'm sure it was confusing for them at the time too. And that's all thanks to that one crooked survey line. Yeah, I think it's dying. So now that western portion from the preemption line was able to be sold, Of course, lots of people wanted this land in Western New York. So first came along Oliver Phelps and Nathaniel Gorham. And we hear this reference as the Phelps and Gorham Purchase. And this is the area of land that we are on right now. So they were the first big speculators. They bought Massachusetts preemption rights. And originally it was supposed to be about 6 million acres of land. But they were only able to negotiate with the Seneca people at Buffalo Creek to purchase the land east of the Genesee River, not to the west. So it ended up being, I think, about 2.5 million acres is what Phelps and Gorham purchased. And so they started selling land. They put up a base in Canandaigua. Okay, that was one of the first big towns that we see in this area. There was a post office. There was a land office. People came through Canandaigua to, pick out a piece of land, pay for it, and head to their new frontier home. But by 1790, Phelps and Gorham could not pay Massachusetts what they were supposed to. So their deal collapsed. And of course, it had a ripple effect on those people that already had land in the area. Okay, enter Robert Morris. So he was a financier of the Revolution, and he went ahead and flipped the parcels that were originally part of the Phelps and Gorham deal to investors. So imagine if you were one of these people that had land. Originally, your title said Phelps and Gorham, and then your title said Morris, and then your title went on to say maybe the Pulteney Associates, okay? Whatever investor got that part of the land. You still had the same farm, but all your paperwork was changing. And of course, when you go to sell your land, that can cause some problems. Morris also decided to buy some massive tracts west of the Genesee. So this is the first time anybody's been able to purchase land west of the Genesee River. And he purchased it from Massachusetts through the Haudenosaunee. And he resold a lot of that land to the Holland Land Company. And the Holland Land Company, they are the ones that bought those 8 westernmost counties, and they were Dutch investors. Morris decided he would reserve a strip for himself called the Morris Reserve at a small 500,000 acres. And you can see all 3 of those areas there. And then there were small military tracts here and there, but we aren't going to get into that today. So the Holland Purchase and the Treaty of Big Tree. The Holland Land Company was the land proprietor that bought the entirety of the 8 most western New York counties and led to its settlement. So we know that there's all these moving parts. We've got Massachusetts, we've got the Haudenosaunee, we've got Robert Morris. And they really tried to make sure that they had the land fair and square from the Native Americans. But it's never really that simple. They had a meeting. It started August 20th, 1797, and the treaty was ultimately signed on September 15th, 1797. And from what I have read, there may have been some alcohol involved in the decisions. So probably not fair on the part of the Haudenosaunee. So after that, September 15th, 1797, that is when the Holland Land Company officially owned the land west of the Genesee, except for 200,000 acres, which were set aside as Native American reservations. Okay, so now all of the land in Western New York is fair game to be sold. So how are they going to get people to move there? What's going to pull them to the area? What's going to push them from the area that they're coming from? So push factors are the hardships, pressures, or limits that drive families to leave a place. The pull factors are going to be promises and opportunities that are drawing someone towards a new frontier. Understanding both sides helps explain why the Genesee country of Western New York filled so quickly and it helps us predict where we can look for families before and after they migrated. So push factors. Once the companies bought these tracts of land, they wanted to make money. By the late 1700s, New England towns were bursting with families. Farms had been divided and redivided over 3 or 4 generations. Imagine if you had 8 kids growing up in Massachusetts and you only had 20 acres. How are you going to divide that between them? Eventually, someone's really not going to get a lot of land that's going to do much of anything. So less and less land, it's being just distributed out. And so younger sons often inherited nothing, and that meant that they had to go work for somebody else. So they may have wanted a new life out on the frontier instead of working for somebody. The land hunger was one of the most powerful push factors in early migration. They just didn't want to be dependent on someone, and they wanted to have a good chunk of land, which I think a lot of people can, resonate with. So the overpopulation in New England led to a lack of jobs. In terms of farming, the farmers had really just pushed that land as far as it could go. The nutrients were depleted, and it was leading to crop failure. Now, in 1816, there was what is called the year without a summer. And there was a volcano that erupted halfway around the world in Indonesia. And it caused this giant plume of ash to essentially just hang out all summer long over North America. And that really affected the crops. Like, it had a catastrophic effect on many farmers' income, and it was the catalyst for many to move. You can see this newspaper article is referencing it. And notice the date, June 12th, 1816. It says the weather, the remarkable change of weather from extreme heat to cold was as great here as the following paragraphs describe it to have been at the eastward. All kinds of vegetation has suffered, and some plants been entirely destroyed by the cold and frost. Okay, not often that you're seeing cold and frost in the middle of June. So they had to figure out something, and they may have just been so fed up that they're like, all right, this is our chance to go and do something new. Let's head to the frontier. Closer to the Revolution, once the American Revolution was over, a lot of people traded with Britain or with Canada. Some of those relationships obviously were severed at the outcome of the Revolution. And so they may have lost their livelihoods in that manner, not even if they're farming. So there was a huge economic downturn in 1819 later on that led to a 2-year recession. So all of these things together, no matter what time it is, late 1700s, early 1800s, there were just some big catalysts for people to move, to be pushed out of the area that they were in. Okay, but why would they want to come to this land? Okay, there was a lot of frontier at this time. What brought them to Western New York? So the Genesee country, it was promised to be fertile soil. Okay, it was meant to draw farmers in. We can say that there's probably some propaganda involved, right? Because people are selling land, they want to make a profit. So they've got to get people here in order to make that profit. Travelers described the Genesee Valley black soil as some of the richest in the country. Land companies like Phelps and Gorham and the Holland Land Company marketed these tracts as affordable and abundant. They would say, here, have 100 acres. It's not enough to just survive on, but you can thrive on 100 acres. You can make it your own, and you'll have something to pass on to your children. Family and community was also another pull. Sometimes you did get these solo people that traveled, but a lot of the times you'll find families, you'll find whole communities that decided they wanted to travel together to the frontier. So families often followed other relatives, okay, chain migration. Sometimes they followed neighbors. Sometimes they followed like-minded people, like church groups. Communities uprooted themselves and reformed in New York. And you can see this in some of the town names. Okay, Bristol from Connecticut. There's a Bristol in Western New York. Brighton, Massachusetts. There's a Brighton in New York. So a lot of the times they kept things really similar, even down to the name. They wanted to rebuild those communities in a familiar setting with familiar people. Okay, another poll was religious and social revival. Western New York was more than farmland, even though at the beginning we kind of think of all these frontiersmen as farmers. But the region became known as the burned over district because of its revivals. So it was the birthplace of new denominations. Okay, we have a lot of people that might be affiliated with the Shakers, a new denomination like the Latter-day Saint movement in Palmyra, and reform movements like abolition, temperance, and women's rights came later on. But that all brought people to the area. For many, these cultural and spiritual opportunities could have been just as enticing as the land. They wanted to be with like-minded people. But migration was not easy. Okay, they are on the frontier. They are some of the first people to ever move into this land. First, climate and topography was a huge barrier to those traveling to the newly purchased land tracts in Western New York. Most of Western and Central New York, we have the Appalachian Plateau, okay, which is the very tip of the Appalachian Mountains. And some of those mountains can reach up to 3,000 feet. This, along with the area being densely forested, made it very difficult to traverse and settle. And then we know how winters are in Western New York. Okay, I'm from Springville, New York. So when they say Buffalo has snow, really it's Orchard Park and Springville that has snow. So they may have experienced harsher winters than they were used to in New England. Okay, by the coast may have been a little bit easier of a winter than in Western New York. So they may have had a difficult time surviving that first year until they got settled. They may have had difficulties with planting. They had to cut logs and build cabins in difficult weather. And for many, that first year was really make or break. And we know about the area being densely forested. Joseph Ellicott, he was the surveyor for the Holland Land Company, and he has extensive maps and journals, and he talks about just how long it took him to survey all of the land in Western New York and lay it out into the townships and ranges that we see in this area. And it was just really, really densely forested. And we're not really used to that too much anymore, but that's what those frontiersmen and women had to deal with. Okay, which leads to lack of infrastructure. When you're the first person, you kind of have to do it on your own. So Joseph Ellicott was aware of this as he surveyed the land for the Holland land purchase. And we know that typically as we build roads, it starts out with those paths that Native Americans used. Then we widen the roads, then other forms of transportation come in, and eventually things get better. Joseph Ellicott first made a road that connected Batavia, which was the hub for the Holland Land Company, like Canandaigua was for the Phelps and Gorham purchase. He connected Batavia and New Amsterdam, which is Buffalo. And then he kept extending those roads out. And this is a map of those first roads that he made. So you can see that he does connect to Canandaigua because that was such a vital point in eastern Western New York. So travel wasn't a matter of just hopping on a nice road with your wagon. You're bumping along in your wagon, no suspension, wooden wheels, heavy loads. You have your whole life with you. Okay, imagine breaking down on the way. Okay, my tire lights kept coming on my trip here, and luckily no flat tires, but things are gonna happen, right? And luckily I would have people to help me, but they did not because there was no one around. So you literally just have to be so self-sufficient. So a trip of 50 miles could take days, and they could really test you physically and emotionally. Roads didn't just shape how people moved, they determined which settlements thrived. Okay, if there was a road nearby, it was going to be more densely settled. Then after we start building roads, we have the Erie Canal come along. So this was another addition to the infrastructure. The Erie Canal began in 1817 and was completed 200 years ago in 1825 with its first passage from Lake Erie to Albany. We'll see in a little while how the canal really helped Rochester and Western New York in general in population growth. But notice that in addition to that east-west Erie Canal route that we're very familiar with, there were also routes that went like south from Rochester, the Genesee Valley Canal, and then went from Syracuse to Oswego. That was called the Oswego Canal. It connected the Erie Canal to Lake Ontario. So there was a network of canals that were being formed. And you can see how closely they followed the roads that were already being built in the area. So the Genesee Valley Canal follows roads very closely to what Ellicott had done down in like Allegheny County. And you can also see, even though the Erie Canal did go north more than what their roads did, it very much is very similar in the path that they took. Okay, the canal era was kind of short-lived because the railroads came on the scene. And that was just a huge connector across the entire country. This map shows the railroad lines in 1853, and the solid lines were the ones that were already completed. Dashed lines were ones that were under construction. So it's a little bit hard to tell, but like from Buffalo to Attica, that was still under construction. From Niagara Falls to Batavia, that was already completed. From Batavia to Canandaigua, that was already completed. And then down, you have that southern route for the railroads, which was really important because the southern part of Western New York was really difficult to get into with the hills, with the mountains, with that densely forested area. Then here's another comparison between the original roads and then where the railroads were built. And you can see even more of a correlation here than with the canal. We see that Batavia is a hub for the railroads. Batavia was a hub for the roads. Same thing with Buffalo. The roads went through Canandaigua. So did the railroad. So those were very, very similar. The Erie Road is the same as the State Line Railroad. And we know that today, now pretty much Route 90 follows these as well. Okay, another barrier to migration was conflict among natives. So this wasn't a huge aspect because there were treaties in place, but I can imagine that there was probably animosity among the two groups of people. Okay, nobody wants to get kicked out of their land and, you know, forced to go somewhere else. So while there were not a lot of these like violent disputes that we see elsewhere, I'm sure it did have, there was a place for it probably. Okay, then last, barrier to migration, psychological. Okay, imagine the willpower that it would take to just pick up your family and go somewhere else. You have no idea what you're walking into. Leaving home meant leaving behind the safety of kin and community. Imagine not knowing if the road ahead even led to some place that you were gonna like or that was gonna be livable. At the end of a difficult journey, all you have is a piece of heavily forested land that you can make into something if you are lucky and hardworking. You had nothing, and after a lot of work, you could have something that looks like this picture here. Okay, you see a man that has cut down a lot of logs. He has just a small log cabin, and it's still a densely forested tract of land. Okay, he does have a few animals, but it looks rough. Okay, and it was rough. I think a lot of the times when we think of the frontier, we think of out west, like South Dakota, where they lived in sod houses. Okay, similar things here, earthen floors. Okay, they just did with what they had, which was basically trees. Okay, whatever they had to do, hopefully trees could help them because that's all that was here. The first year you would have to cut down trees and make a log cabin and clear enough land to farm. These settlers were farming in a place they did not know. Now, when they settled, they tried to typically pick a place that had a similar growing habitat, growing season, which could help them, but it didn't always work out that way. So there was always a serious risk of failure. There was no one to bail them out if things didn't go well, and they may not have had neighbors for miles. Winters were brutal, and settlers often arrived too late to plant. So you had to be strong-minded in order to do this. All right, so let's go ahead to the migration trends. So when did settlers begin coming to Western New York? Now, as I was talking to you out here, and a lot of you said that you do have very, very early settlers, I particularly asked you, what year did they come? Because I did not want to hear anything in the 1700s. Okay? And you all passed the test. I heard 1804. I think I heard 1816. So those are all very plausible things that could happen. So we're going to take a close look at population density maps over about 50 years to see how the population changed in Western New York. So 1790, on your left is just an inset of the bigger map. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a glimpse of what all of America looked like in 1790 in terms of population, and then focus in on New York. So you can see that Western New York, pretty much all white. There's nothing there. So we don't have anybody living in this area. Okay, they had not settled things with the Haudenosaunee. So besides a few people for military endeavors, there wasn't anybody here. One thing I do want to note is that you can see Kentucky. Kentucky has settlement, and that is just so far west. So they had people, but not Western New York. And if you're wondering about the scale, the key, the number 1 with the lightly dashed lines, that is 2 to 6 people per square mile. And that's really as much as we see anywhere in upstate New York at that point. Okay, moving on to 1800, we now see a little bit of that 2 to 6 people per mile. Okay, then Roman numeral 1, kind of inching over the Finger Lakes, but still nothing too much in the area that we're talking about today. And you can see that southern part of Ohio, Kentucky, it just keeps getting more and more populated, and New York has not caught up yet. Okay, then we'll do a side-by-side of 1810 and 1820. And these maps are a little bit easier to read. So in 1810, you can see that pretty much all of Western New York has some settlement, except that really deep southern Western New York, like by the Allegheny State Park, Allegheny Reservation. The area around Buffalo has increased, and it now has 6 to 18 inhabitants per square mile, as does the easternmost part of Western New York. by 1820, all of Western New York finally has at least 2 inhabitants per square mile. And you can see really up towards Rochester, that is starting to fill in. The part closest to Lake Ontario now has 45 to 90 inhabitants per square mile. And we know that the Erie Canal was finished in 1825. So in between 1820 and then the map that I'm about to show you in 1830 is really when the Erie Canal was finished. It took off. So it transformed Western New York. Okay. And really, Rochester is a great city to choose to really look at on the benefits to the Erie Canal. So in 1817, Rochester had about 1,500 people. And then less than 2 decades later, there were over 9,000 people. So why is this? It's because the canal made Rochester a key transfer point for flour, wheat, and other goods moving from the Genesee Valley to markets in Albany and New York City. Okay, and we know that Rochester had so many grain mills and it was known for its flour during this time. That was one of the really big industries during the Erie Canal era. So really, that was like watching a little village become the size of a small city in about a generation. So even though 9,000 people doesn't seem like it's a lot, going from 1,500 to 9,000 in the mid 1820s, that is really a big boom. And think about what that means for us as researchers. More people, there's going to be more churches established, there's going to be more job records, okay, church records from those churches. And you might even find things specifically from the Erie Canal. So more people equals more records typically. So that's a good thing for us. You'll find people on payroll lists, labor contracts. You may even find some interesting accident reports. Don't ask me, I've never come across any, but you never know what you might find in employment records. People founded churches, they founded schools. All of these things can leave a paper trail. So if you have ancestors who arrived in New York in the 1820s or 1830s, go ahead and look for records. They might be there for you. Churches, employment. We all know that pre-1850 research is so difficult, but as we're getting closer to 1830, you have even a better chance of finding something as people became more concrete in where they are. Okay, then we're moving on to 1830 and 1840. In 1830, you can really see how the Erie Canal affected the population density. It is very even all the way across that Erie Canal area. And it's even at that 45 to 90 inhabitants per square mile. Then finally in 1840, we see some of that solid black in Rochester. We also see it in Buffalo, Niagara Falls, which means there are at least 90 inhabitants per square mile by that time. So from this, you can really tell that that's when the population exploded, was with that, the Erie Canal was really that diving off point. And then the least populated place continues to be down there by the Allegheny Reservation, Allegheny State Park area. Okay, now let's really get into the nitty-gritty of the people who came to the area. We kind of know when a lot of people came to Western New York, but let's look at the who. First, we are going to look at the state of Connecticut. So you have my lovely highlighted drawings. And these are based on the 1855 census. There is an excellent article. It's in the syllabus. It's the Darlington article. And he analyzed the 1855 census because it shows the birthplace of everyone, that state census. And it also goes specific to the county if they were from New York. If they weren't from New York, it asked what state or what country they were from. So James Darlington, he went through and he just analyzed the census data. And of course, 1855 is a little bit later than what we have been talking about so far, but I think it's pretty good, a pretty good place to start. And now we know that there are never really any rules in genealogy. This is just something that might be helpful. So Connecticut, people were obviously coming from down there where Connecticut is. They came straight across into like Chemung County, and then they also followed the Erie Canal. Now they didn't really get too far into Western New York. The main Connecticut immigrants really stopped in like Monroe and Livingston counties. They also traveled up to Oswego County and then Cortland. So with these migration patterns, what James Darlington did is he looked at every single town, analyzed all of that birth data, and then he made these maps based off of, okay, this town is predominantly settled by Connecticut-born people. This town's predominantly settled by Vermont-born people. And then at the end, we're going to see a conglomerate map of New York, so you can really put everything together. Okay, Massachusetts. It was almost hard to tell the difference between the two when I clicked the screen. They followed a very similar path. We know Massachusetts is right above Connecticut, but the Massachusetts group did get all the way into Erie County. Connecticut and Massachusetts, that was the two highest states for people who migrated into New York State. Then we have Rhode Island. There's no significant migration of Rhode Islanders into Western New York. Okay, they didn't go very far. Then we get to this really interesting one, which is Vermont. Okay, this is really the only one that took a northerly route. Even New Hampshire didn't decide to take a northerly route. And then you also have just straight across where that Erie Canal is, where the railroads went through all the way over to Erie County. And then there's New Hampshire, just a straight line. They really didn't vary too far off of that main route that we've been seeing from the other states. Okay, then migration from New Jersey. Kind of interesting that they did not come more from, you know, the New York City way, but they came up through Pennsylvania, didn't spread out too much, not really too many of them that decided to come. Then you'll see similarly the people from Pennsylvania. They didn't make it too far either. Okay, so we can put this all together into this very confusing map, and I did not put this together. If you want to look at it, it is in the James Darlington article that is linked in your syllabus. And so I don't even know how much work this was, but it shows the predominant settlement group in each area of each county. Okay, so you'll see that the Ys are Eastern New York. I know we just talked about all of the states that migrated through, but most of this central Western New York portion was settled by those Eastern New Yorkers. So all of the Ys, really, we see up here by Lake Ontario, it was predominantly Eastern New Yorkers. Where I'm from in Erie County, Southeast Erie County, it says a T, and there's some M's there. So T is Vermont, M is Massachusetts. Okay, I was kind of disappointed when I saw this because my ancestors are not from Vermont and they are not from Massachusetts. So my ancestors do not follow this rule that James Darlington created. So like I said, it's helpful, but it's not the end all be all for strategies. You'll also see that there is a tiny little S for Scotland. And we see a few New Jersey, few Rhode Island, but really not in our area. P is Pennsylvania. You can see that that is definitely congregated down towards the PA line. And then it does show Welsh as well, but none of them are predominantly in Western New York. All right, so that is all of the history. I don't think I make you look at any more maps for the rest of the presentation. Now we're just going to kind of talk about how we can use all this information. So the genealogical impacts of migration in our genealogical research. So the first clue is town names. You want to look for towns that have the same name in another state. So basically what you want to do is find the origin of the town name and see if it's helpful, because you'll find out sometimes it's not. So some examples: Bristol is named after Bristol County, Massachusetts. Newfane is named after Newfane in Vermont. Wethersfield, there's a Wethersfield, Connecticut. That's where my family's from, but they did not settle in Wethersfield, New York. Sometimes you'll also see with the migration is that they stopped somewhere in Eastern New York and then kept going west too. So don't count that out. And then Pittsford, there's a Pittsford in Vermont. Now, sometimes it's not that helpful. For example, Parrington and Fairport, that was named after the family who first settled the area. So that's a little bit helpful because you can figure out where they settled from or where they came from. And then maybe some of the other settlers also came from that area. But then you have people, places like Springville, who were not named after people. They were just named after geographic features. Cold Spring, same thing. And then you have some indigenous influence names like Canandaigua and Seneca. Okay, then you just have, you know, the really random ones that does not help us at all. Okay, so for example, Chile is named after Chile in South America, although from what I've read, that is somewhat disputed. Then you have they just decided to name it after places that they've heard about, I think, or maybe their long lost ancestors came from there. So Warsaw, Rome, Greece, Geneva, all those European places that maybe they were trying to emulate with their town name. And so that's why they went with that. And that is obviously not really helpful to us. And to even confuse it further, sometimes over time, town names have changed. So Gorham was originally called Lincoln and Easton. It had two names. Naples was originally called Middletown. Phelps was originally called Sullivan. And Richmond was originally Pittstown. Okay, and of course, this is just a very small example. But all of your town names will fall into the category of helpful or not helpful, but it always is helpful to at least search it out and see if it will be helpful. Then a really big one is jurisdictions over time. So we talked about how messy the whole beginning of all this land sale was and all the different people involved. So there was a lot of confusion over the land in the early days of settlement, and records may be all over the place because of that. So knowing the history of your counties is really important to make sure you can find all the relevant records. So if we want to look at county formations, Ontario is the overarching county. Literally, it encompassed everything west of the preemption line, and that was formed from Montgomery County in 1789. Then it broke up into all of these other counties that we know today. So Steuben was formed, sorry, that's misspelled, was formed in 1796. Monroe and Livingston in 1821. So there was a huge gap before we got more counties over in this central Western New York portion. So you may find a lot of records in Ontario County. Then Wayne and Yates were formed in 1823. Chemung was formed in 1836. And then very last was Schuyler, formed in 1854. So if you have an ancestor that lived in Schuyler County, you are probably going to have to search through a lot of different counties before you have exhausted all of your research avenues. Then if we're looking at those 8 westernmost counties, Genesee was the big one that was formed from Ontario in 1803. Then you have Allegheny. 1806 was formed from Genesee, but it didn't finish getting organized until 1817. Niagara, Chautauqua, and Cattaraugus were 1808. Erie County, which we think of today as like a big county because it's the, Buffalo's the county seat. It didn't get formed until 1821. So if you're researching someone in Buffalo, don't discount Niagara County. And if you're researching in Niagara County, don't discount Buffalo because you never know where those records really ended up between those two. Then Orleans in 1825 and Wyoming last in 1841. So to talk a little bit about the messiness of county formation, here's an example from the Cattaraugus County Historical Advisory Committee. They say Cattaraugus County was formed in 1808 from Genesee County and named Town of Olean. Under the act of its formation, Cattaraugus County was provisionally annexed to Niagara County until there were 500 taxable residents that could vote for the New York Assembly. In 1812, for judicial purposes and convenience of the inhabitants, the eastern portion of the county was annexed to Allegheny County. Acquiring in 1817 the required number of taxable inhabitants qualified to vote, Cattaraugus County was chartered as it is today. The first courthouse and jail were built in Ellicottville in 1817, and the courts and county business were conducted there until the county seat was moved to Little Valley. So we can see that it was not necessarily easy just to form a new county. And if any of you are familiar with Cattaraugus and Allegheny County, you know that that is not what they look like today. Cattaraugus is not that wide. So that was when it was annexed over. Okay, and here are the counties as we know them today. So since it did take so long for, which we learned was about until 1854, for all the counties to be formed, really make sure you're going through and figuring out every county that spot your ancestor lived, all the counties that they were part of. So one of the best sources for county formation was the Newberry site, but it is currently not functioning. But there are other ways that you can easily trace the changes. Family search wikis are a really great way. It'll just break down the county formations for you. Sometimes I'll ask ChatGPT. I'll say, okay, I'm interested in this town. Tell me all the counties and what years those counties were, that town was part of that county, of course, with sources so I can check ChatGPT. But there is one if you really need a visual to see the changes of the counties, and that is called mapofus.org. You can click on a specific year and see the outline of all the counties. So that's really helpful, mapofus.org. Okay, another clue to use in your genealogy, use those migration trends. Look at the population maps. Think about where were the roads, where were the canals, where were the railroads? Where could my ancestor come here the easiest? Okay, and also think about topography and settlement timelines. Then, of course, you always want to use cluster research. Sometimes we call it the fan club, because this early migration research can be difficult. So fan club, you are researching family, friends, associates, and neighbors. And here's a little graphic of people that could be included in the fan club. So family, friends, neighbors, associates, church members, witnesses, in-laws, landowners, relatives, and in-laws is on there again. Okay, apparently they're very important. So don't discount anybody. Make sure if you keep saying a last name, it's probably important. You might have to go ahead and research that family first to find your own family. Now with Family Search Full Text, you can really maybe find your ancestor as a witness to a will or other probate proceedings. So fan club can be another great way for you to find your early migration ancestors. Okay, so today we talked about those early inhabitants and treaties. We talked about the messy borders of towns, of counties, of the state. We talked about why people would migrate and what made it challenging, migration trends, and then how you can use that in your genealogical research. So I'll go ahead and take some questions if anybody has them. I can repeat it. Okay, so how did these states claim land far west from where they were located, and how did it resolve itself? Now, I can't speak too much about how it resolved itself, but they would claim land all the way basically from sea to shining sea, because it was in their charters. Like Massachusetts charter from the king would say, you own all land west, you know, from these parallels. So they thought they owned everything until you couldn't go anymore. So that's where it's like, yeah, you see Connecticut and Massachusetts way out there in Ohio. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how the disputes got settled. Yes. That is a great question. They are based off of census data. So I would have to go look at that. Because yeah, then it would be a whole nother way to look at it, like 2 to 6 families per square mile. Great. So probably 90% of the maps that I use are from the Library of Congress. So they're just free to use. They're easily searchable. I did find a few like on the Buffalo Historical Museum. Some of the towns, as I was researching them, had maps to use. The one map I used was from that James Darlington article. Yeah, that's excellent. And that brings up a good point too, is that most towns and all counties typically have really well-researched histories where you can find really good nuggets of information. So as of today, I'm not sure because their land holdings have shrunk, but as of the Holland land purchase, they had 200,000 acres. But it's not the full 200,000 acres because I think at least one reservation is no longer in existence. But so it's less than 200,000 acres. I do not. That is a great question, though. Yes, she was asking about when there was, volatility in Western New York, and if people had to flee, where did they go? I know that some people did just continue to go west, west, west. So you'll see that some of your New York ancestors eventually went to Wisconsin. Okay, that's what mine did. But yeah, they may have found refuge in Pennsylvania for a while. I did not come across a Joseph Abram Ward. Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Let me go back. Close your eyes if. Okay, almost there. Okay, so yeah, the claim by Massachusetts. Massachusetts was a little big for its britches. Because we know that Massachusetts even, they claimed Maine at one point in time. Maine was part of Massachusetts before it broke off into a state. So Massachusetts just, they thought they owned everything. And it probably resolved sometime at the end of the revolution, I would assume, but I do not know the exact answer. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kaitlyn, for that presentation. We appreciate that. Couple announcements that I had. Eric, do we have the book winner? Jeff Cooper. Congratulations. Thank you again, Andrew, for this donation. One other announcement, our next general meeting will be October, gives me chills saying the word October already, October 21st. And our short program speaker is Holly Watson, who's the Livingston County historian. And also RGS's own Eric Vaughn will be presenting on creating family memory books. John, did you have any ending announcements? Okay. Thank you very much for attending tonight.